Hey, my name's Kyle. Follow along as I show you my current KOH finishing wheeling rig and embark on building a new chassis in a two-car garage with a bunch of hand tools. All right, so as I'm looking to build a new chassis, I wanted to go around what I've been wheeling and what the previous creation is. So this is my Jeep. Started out as a Jeep several years ago. It was my first car. It's now been a 4855. We raced the Legends, or the modified class at King of the Hammers twice. We finished in 2021, second attempt. I'll go around real quick, but basically coilover bypass back in the back, mounted to the axle. Front single 2.5 inch coilover. We've got a Dana 60 up front that's narrowed. It was a Super Duty 60. The rear's an Eaton HO72. The rear end with the 14-inch travel shocks that are a class requirement. At the angle they're at, bumped and strapped, it cycles 15 inches. The front angled gets you a little bit more. Bumped and strapped, it cycles 14 inches clean. Air bumps, it's a 4-liter. Straight 6, just stock motor, but it does have a Cherokee AW4, and right now it has a Rubicon 4-to-1 transfer case. When I raced, it always had the NP231. This is a 2-inch cage. It's the second cage that I built for the car, but basically everything under the seat back was cut off of the car, and it's tube chassised all back. Front end 8274. The winch was actually sectioned and moved up. I mean, the frame was sectioned and moved up to get some more up travel out of the front end. Right now it's got a double-ended ram. Back when I raced, it did not, but I was trying to go to a double-ended ram with a ported steering box to have a drag link and a ram. Double-ended ram. The steering box did not work out, so I ended up just putting an orbital on the car, so it's full hydro now. One of the things that could change, but I don't really want to change it. Under the hood, kind of an engine cage. There's not tubes going through the dash. I have the stock dash in it, and I just never quite got around to wanting to remove that. But it is tied into the sliders, and the chassis has been very strong for what the car's done. Giant Donaldson, it's one of the big Cummins air filters. Engine cage here is all 2-inch, and then some of the supporting stuff like sliders and things are 1 3/4 inch. So the new chassis is going to be a lot of the same parts. It's going to be the same axles. It's going to be the same shock package, but there's just some goals I have with it. This car weighs a little over 5,000 pounds. I'm going to hopefully scale it here soon to get you an exact number in its current form, but when we raced it was about 5,100 pounds. It's gained a little bit of weight since then. The new car goal is to get it lighter. I want flat links. I really want flat links, so the belly's going to end up being a little bit lower, which I'm okay with, because at ride height I'd like the links to be dead flat. You know, these links dead flat, or even a little upward facing just for better go fast handling. I want to do a double triangulated 4-link in the front. Right now is a double triangulated 4-link in the back, which has been excellent. It keeps Heims and bushings alive for a silly long time because everything's triangulated. Rear mount radiator. In the new car, I'd really like to go back to a front mount radiator, which is, you know, not very race car, but I can get rid of all that plumbing. I can get the radiator back down lower, and I think depending on how I design the front end, I should be able to do that just fine and keep a Jeep grill for the aesthetics. The cage here in the car has been good, but with the new chassis, there's some tubes like, you know, you don't have to have rock sliders and then the internal door bars and cages on a tube car. You know, they can all be one. So there's some of the stuff there that I want to do that I think will make it lighter and cleaner. I want to make the whole cab actually smaller, narrower. I want the two seats closer together, just for a little more maneuverability. And I think I can get the whole roof height a decent bit lower while keeping headroom. This car has good headroom in it, but because I can get the seats lower in the new chassis, that'll be part of the goals there. And then I really want to do trailing arms. I'm going to use the same shock package because it's what I got, but I think I can do a trailing arm just because it'll be fun to experience that. And then if I do end up racing, you know, 4800 Legends class or something like that, I'll pull the bypass off and the coilover and probably end up getting a bigger single coilover, because that class you have to have a single shock. So that's something I can do. There's just some parts of the car that I want to improve, and there's other things that I just want to try out. So the other thing I want to do is I want to do leading arms. Not very common, but we did that on my dad's TJ. And it's just kind of a cool way to package, lets you get the bump stop a lot cleaner on the axle. And the goal will be to get more than the 14 inches of travel that I'm using right now. So we'll see how that all packages out, but the rear should be able to get quite a bit more travel. So those are kind of some of the goals of the new car, as well as designing the chassis around a V8. I've got a 5.3 aluminum LS motor, a turbo 400, and I think we're going to end up using an NP230. Just a little context to add in here. So this is how the car started. I don't know if I really want to share the details here yet, but you'll probably get most of them through the video. But I basically started with just doing a lot of homework, looking at different cars, looking at how much, you know, separation the belly pan to the floor is a big deal. The higher you go, you know, the lower the links are going to be, the higher the seat's going to be, but you can run floor tubes over the transmission and transfer case. So I kind of split the difference on there. Like I said, I want flat links, but I don't want to be sitting like a monster truck. But I wanted to give you some quick specs on the Jeep. So on the TJ as it sits in relative stock mod condition, but it's on 40s. Took some measurements here. So the top of the car is 77 inches tall. I think I can get that lower with the new layout. It's approximately 14 feet long. There is some overhang in front of the front tires, which I want to remove. I want the front tires to be the furthest forward part of the new car, just for things like, you know, dropping off back door, stuff like that. Nothing to hang up on. There is some overhang behind the rear tires, which I'm going to keep it that way to keep weight bias rear so the car jumps well, which, believe it or not, my current car does jump pretty well. Currently I have a 113-inch wheelbase, 20-inch belly height. The front links are 38.5 inches long. That's bolt to bolt. The rear are 31 inches long, bolt to bolt, which is short for a car of its style. But because the link angles in the rear are very good, kind of took some inspiration from the Savvy Curry 4500 car they built probably more than 10 years ago now that dominated the 4500 class. Short links, the car was real slippery. They weren't bending links a lot. That's proven to be the case in mine. But this time around, as I'm going for more travel and for trailing arms, those rear links are going to be quite a bit longer, probably somewhere around the 4-foot mark, but we'll see. And there's 38 inches between the frame rails. So if you're looking under the car, basically that's the space that the transmission, the exhaust, all those things can fit in. So I've now shrunk that down to where we're 33 inches on the outside of the tubes. So to the inside, obviously going to be quite a bit narrower than a stock Jeep frame. So even if the belly is lower, it's going to be quite a bit narrower, and it'll be dead flat. So I think that'll help at the slipperiness. And 28-inch slider height. So from the ground to the bottom of the rock sliders is 28 inches. I think that's also going to be quite a bit higher now, as the sliders are part of the floor mount and aren't really protected a body anymore. So there's some of the quick specs that I thought were relevant to the current car and some of the goals for going forward. All right, first night, getting started on the chassis build. So I started off by building a chassis table. So I'll flip around and show you what I made. All right, so what I have here is 34 inches by 10 feet. 34 inches kind of correlates to what I want to do with the belly pan. So I made it to where the side widths of the belly are going to sit on the table nice and square. And then 10 feet's long enough to where I should be able to get jack stands hanging axles in the future. Based on a wheelbase of a max of 120 inches, I think realistically I'm going to be aiming for somewhere around 112 inches, but we'll see, you know, how it all shakes out. But use this guy, digital angle finder, and just a lot of measuring tape. My garage is very much not flat, so I wanted to make a perfect table to build things off of. So it's nice and square. I use shims. It was sitting on the ground, of course, as bare tubes. So I use shims and things to level out the long side tube, then squared up the lower cross tube over there, and then did the same here. So when I welded this on the ground, I had a few shims, 1/4-inch plate shims on the end to get it all nice and level there. Now it's living up on some jack stands. I was thinking I'd build legs for the table, but For now, I think I'll leave it on the jack stands. It might be useful to change the height someday, not sure. But it is all leveled this way. It's leveled side to side pretty well. But most of all, I know the table's flat. So anything I build on it should also be flat. All right, so here we have, this is gonna be the belly of the car. It's 33 inches by 38 inches. We'll see how I like that. Basically, I wanted it wide enough to where I can fit the transfer case in there and have room for exhaust pipes, fuel lines, stuff like that. But obviously the wider you go, you know, the less slippery the car is. But I think that's a good balance there. We'll see how it goes. But I did this out of 1 3/4 quarter wall, which is miserable to work with. And I cut all the 45s, just marked them with a speed square, cut them with an angle grinder, which was also terrible. But this is the only quarter wall that's gonna be in the whole car. So it's all downhill from here. And 45'd all those, spent 1 million hours getting the joints to fit just right, and then cross taping it to make sure it was square. And then of course, because it's on my chassis table, I know that it's nice and flat. So after quite a bit of time invested in that, I'm happy with it. So here we're moving over to what's gonna be the floor rectangle. I'm kind of dividing the car into the belly rectangle, the floor rectangle, and then there's going to be the door bars / harness bar rectangle. But I'm doing these out of square tube on the side. It's 2-inch 188 wall. And you can think of that basically as the rock slider. So I wanted that to be a little bit beefier. And the square tube, not that common in full race cars, but I think it's kind of a neat look to put just a little bit of square tube in there. It will also make putting the floor across a little easier to line things up and make that fit nicely. And it'll also make the tubes that go down to the belly a little easier to notch, because I'll really only be tube notching on that side. And here it'll just be a 15-degree cut or whatever it ends up being. But going across here, we have 2-inch 120 wall DON. That's going to be the main structure of the cage. So this is essentially the bottom of the cage, and I'm squaring that up. Now I'm not going to close the far side, because there's a chance once the 4-link up front is mounted that the upper link bars, picture they're kind of going like this, are actually going to come up higher than that. So I might put a piece of tube across it right now just to hold this thing square, but ultimately something is not going to get added there until later. All right, we have the floor flat thanks to the table, and now square, which lots of right angle square usage, and then lots of diagonal taping. Now across here, I found that if I did not support these two legs, they just kind of wiggled all over the place despite being half welded on this end. So got them scrapped 1 by 1-inch square tube, extra rusty, so it doesn't belong. But I put 3 tacks on either side of it after cross taping it a whole bunch. So I'll cut that tail off, and then next up, we'll be figuring out how to space this and the base apart. All right, so it's starting to look a little bit like something. So there's our belly rectangle down there. This is what's going to be our floor and essentially the bottom of the cage. I used some wood. This is where your fancy computer design jigs come in handy. But I used some wood and a tremendous amount of effort, but came up with some cool stuff. So these are, luckily I've got a bunch of these squares from my grandpa, but basically you can use the square on the bottom of the frame there to get it lined up just right, and then clamp it as it flattens itself out like that, so that it's upright and it's on the face of the chassis table. And then the bottom tube, or the bottom belly, I use just a right angle square to get that spaced evenly on this face. So I have the square here, square there, and basically it allowed me to run a tape from here to here and get my 8 7/8. Didn't really matter what the measurement is, it's just what it was. Make it the same on either side. So it turned out to be 8 7/8 here to the inside of that tube there. And then real carefully, I hung a tape from here to here and got that dimension for the rearward sweep. It's a little bit of a guess as to how far I want essentially the floor and the start of the cage back from where the belly is. And the belly should end basically at the rear output of the transfer case. So how you orient this ultimately has a big factor in how much your feet are next to the transmission or the rear cylinder of the motor, because the motor is going to intrude here. Keep in mind that tube doesn't exist. But anyway, I think I got it pretty close to where I want it. The spacing, basically from the chassis table or the bottom of the car up to the bottom of the slider, is right about 12 inches. It's a little bit less, but it doesn't really matter that much. It's like 11 and 5/8 or whatever, or 11 and 7/8, but it matches everywhere. So I'm happy with that. There's some cars like the bomber car or some of the goat built stuff that comes up and the 90s out here. Other cars do it like a wedge where there's, it's not a 45, but it's something like that slopes in. I'm ultimately going for the wedge just because I think it's going to be a lot easier to fit stuff in there. Exhaust, fuel lines, give me some more space there. And when you skid plate this section, I think you don't get the slider strikes real hard like you would with one of the 90-degree cars. So I just think it'll last a little bit longer. I recognize it might be hitting stuff a little more often, but I'm not too worried about it. So the first tube that's going to go to join these, I measured center line on the belly. It's not center line at the chassis table, so don't worry about that. And then I used the square. I put that square here and brought it up here to get a rough mark, which if I line these up visually a little more like this, you'll see. And then I did a tape measure to match it so that I could easily tape measure on that side. So that'll be my center tube, joining there to there and here to here over here. And then I can work on my diagonals from there. But I'll be pretty relieved when I can get the center tubes in there because this whole thing's a little wobbly and I'm scared of, the kids coming in and bumping it, or I sneeze and run an extension cord on it and mess it all up. But it'll work.